Inviting me to speak with you very briefly about some of the findings that we had. And then I also wanted to include some recommendations, since you all we're focusing on international student flourishing, and I love that title. Okay. So Yingling already talked about some of this, but we are trying to address more issues of global dimensions of planning. So it is included in our Planning Accreditation Board curriculum now. So that's something that we as faculty have to address in some of our classes. And this is a graphic showing, at least for master students, that there is a consistent rise with some dips here and there, but a general increase of international students in our programs. And in some of our research, we found that generally there's a lot of benefits to having more diverse students overall. Part of that is that it helps us to examine our own biases and positionality in the field. And the way that I teach, at least, that's something that is a key component. Thinking about planning practice is very much tied to our own identities, our own experiences. And that's something that through our curriculum and student composition, we also hope can help to push that idea. And also thinking about having more diverse students overall helps us to understand, help students to understand kind of how there's interdependence and multiculturalism in our learning. So a lot of your benefits, your perspectives are very much needed in our planning programs. Having that kind of interactions with other students, being able to share your backgrounds and your own experiences in planning from your home countries are also very much valued. This is just an image from COVID. So anybody remember this boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal, right? So COVID also helped us think about our planning education and planning discipline overall, and how it's very much become much more globalized, thinking about even supply chains, but also global impacts of climate change overall. So even our work needs to become much more globalized. So our study is a little bit earlier than the one that GPEC did, and it's great. It seems like there's a lot of overlaps in our findings, which is great that it's cooperated. But our study was generally trying to understand student and also practitioners' experiences with diversity and climate. And so our study, we collected data from 2016 to 2017. And that image that Yingling had showed of our article was specifically looking at 451 students that were surveyed. And then we did 42 interviews with international students and students of color. And we partly did this overlap because it's very much understudied. Typically, we might look at students kind of in these different canons, but we wanted to show these overlaps because of what this quotation I have here from our article, that the minoritization of international students has implications for our planning departments, in part because any kind of diversity or inclusion efforts that we have are going to not only impact students of color, but also international students too. So students overall reported that faculty were supportive of them, but that there were some instances of discrimination and marginalization. And those experiences also extended to the classroom too, where students reported some experiences of alienation or isolation. There's also a finding that we had where international students struggle with this gap of understanding some knowledge of the United States. And so one of our recommendations is to create an arrival guide. So an example with my current department is we have a student resource guide that talks about which office you go to, where do you find housing, but also a guide about what are kind of the major policies in the United States. How does our government system structure work? So that's kind of a recommendation, at least for the faculty and department side. And we also saw that there are some challenges with department and university policies. One, I think similar to the GPEC study, that sometimes when students raise issues, there was a lack of response, or departments tend to be more reactive instead of proactive in trying to understand student issues. There's also generally some lack of transparency about funding opportunities too, that maybe a lot of these funding opportunities are more informal. They're not widely advertised, which makes it challenging for students who are not in those networks, who are not connected to certain faculty to know about funding. And then also gap in terms of available funding overall. Of course, students always want more funding. They always, have that need. And then addressing efforts around diversity recruitment efforts too. So I want to, given the audience, kind of turn it now to thinking about how do you all, with this workshop, contribute to your own flourishing as graduate students. And these are kind of 4 findings, 4 tips that we also talk about with our students. We have kind of a back to school workshop that we do with them. And I have this image here because I think it's a good representation of COVID. COVID was a lot of good reminders, also thinking about students have very complex lives. You may have your family responsibilities, other jobs. A lot of our students are working multiple jobs. And so even if they are our graduate assistants, they still have other responsibilities to fulfill. And so we have a lack of time, in addition to stressors about our mental health, our social connectivity that we clearly need when we are feeling isolation. And so these are kind of my suggestions and happy to discuss after. So one is thinking about finding your community. So in our study, at least, we found that there are some pretty clear allies, a lot of overlaps with especially students of color too, but it could be other people in your program, and thinking about how your fellow students are going to be your future colleagues. So I have a couple of examples in my own experience. So in my master's program, I got to meet master's and PhD students, and I still write with them. They are still my writing group. We've kind of had different iterations. But also we applied for a grant recently and got it. And so it's thinking about the people in your classrooms are not just other classmates, but they will be your future networks. And also connecting to other university organizations at your school and beyond. And so where I was at for my PhD, we had other research centers. They had great pots of money to go to conferences. And so there was one that was like, you don't even have to do Canadian studies. If you're traveling to Canada for a conference, they will give you money. So it's great ways to kind of not only network, but think about how to supplement kind of your, not only your financial part, but also thinking about your kind of social connections with these other entities on campus. Asking for help is a big one I talk about with students. If they can send me an email and it saves them 3 hours, I tell them go ahead, right? And it's thinking about how to balance efficiency of your limited time and resources and energy, but also helps you build connections. So if you are relatively new to networking and you want to connect with people, actually asking for help is a great way. Can you look at my CV? Can you give me feedback? And I don't know, I think there's a session later on mentoring, but I wanted to throw this image up, although you can't see some of it, but this is from the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development. And even as faculty, the advice that we get is to build your mentoring map. So instead of just relying on one person, it's thinking about the different aspects that you can get connected to people. So you can see emotional support, right? Maybe those are your family and friends. Intellectual community could be people who have overlapping areas of interest, and substantive feedback may not be the same people. It's people you can say, hey, I have 75% of my paper done. Can you review it? Can you give me some more detailed comments? And so thinking about how to identify those connections to also build your own mentoring map. I love this one because I also have struggled with this. So I always tell students perfectionism kills success. So you're never going to write the perfect paper. You will never write, the perfect report, dissertation, thesis, whatnot. It's just thinking about when you're going to stop the paper, when you think it's good enough. And this also helps to think about what's called a growth or a fixed mindset. So the one on the right, fixed mindset, has to do with perfectionism, where if you always are thinking about this outcome, did my paper get accepted to the conference? Yes or no? Did it get accepted to this journal? Yes or no? Then you're really focusing on just this kind of binary outcome. And that can help to contribute to giving up more easily, approaching challenges in this kind of failure, like I just succeeded or I failed. And it's not really thinking about what you can get from that experience. The first paper I ever submitted in my master's program, I got 20 pages of feedback with that rejection letter. I have never received 20 pages of feedback after that. I think that's growth. But, it's like a painful process. I had to really think about, or actually I couldn't think about the paper. I couldn't look at it for months. I had to talk about all these people. It's been quite a few years since then. And so I think when I approach revise and resubmit processes, I think I really do think about it as a way to improve my paper, or maybe it's not a good fit for that journal. But I really had to kind of focus from the fixed mindset, to the growth mindset, right? So if you look on the left side, it's thinking about what can I learn from these challenges? What's something that I can grow from, thinking about persevering over time. So that's something I encourage my students to, not just focusing on your grades or something got accepted or not, thinking about the growth process. Finally, you all are ahead of this. It's thinking about how to get involved. So you're already at this workshop, which is great. You're getting connected to GPEC and ACSP. I was way back a student rep, and that helped me to meet a lot of folks at ACSP. I was also able to push for some cool programming. I don't know if they still have it, but we had the graduate student clinic booth where students can sign up to meet with faculty. So there's a lot of great ways to get involved in ACSP. We're all volunteers, so we are all looking for help when we're in our ACSP committees. And so that's a great way to get involved. And thinking about kind of leadership opportunities at your school or other local organizations. So some of our international students are not allowed to be employed outside the university due to their visa, but I also still encourage them, if you have time, to just volunteer, go to like a local city event, find ways to get engaged still, and that could still be your professional development, even if you're not formally employed by these opportunities, and that's something you can add then to your resume and CV. I think I'm okay with time, but happy to answer any questions. Or you can also contact me after. Here's my email address.